All right, guys. So we are learning all about viruses. There's lots of information I can share about viruses with you guys. So I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, but also gearing you up with all the good information that we've got. So here we are. Scientists cannot agree upon whether or not they think viruses are living or are not living. And so I'm going to go ahead and explain to you exactly what it is a virus is as best as I can. I'm going to give you some examples of different kinds of viruses, and then I'm going to ask you guys to come to your own conclusion. What do you think? Are viruses living or not? So let's talk parts of a virus. So a virus has several different parts to it, but it is a pretty simple um, specimen, if you will. So here we go. Let's take a look. If you look right here, that is called your protein coat. So it is this outer protein layer that surrounds part of the virus. Next, we have just a piece of DNA right here. That's that genetic blueprint for life, just a piece of it. And then we have this, what we call the sheath, which is this wrapped around kind of coated area to protect a mechanism inside of it. Next, we have tail fibers, and these are kind of like little legs, if you will, that help it attach to material. And what this kind of virus is, it's the bacteriophage, and what it does is it goes down and it injects its DNA through this tube into a cell. And so this might look a little different than maybe some of the pictures you've seen recently when we talk about coronavirus, right? It looks very different from this type of virus, and that's because viruses actually vary greatly from each other. There's lots of different forms of viruses. So let's take a look. Oh, that's the base plate. That's where the material comes out. So if we were to look at maybe something a little more similar to the coronavirus, here's what we would look at. This circular shaped virus, it does still have the same basic material. So if you look, this outermost material right here is the protein coat, just like in the last picture. These are little keys. We call them protein spikes, but later on in the next video, you'll kind of see why I call them keys. But they're like little openings, if you will, that or keys that allow the virus to enter into cells. So instead of, in this last picture, this piece right here where it injects its material into or enters a cell from that opening, these coronaviruses, these circle viruses, these spherical ones, they do that through these little keys all over the outside of their body. All right, so next you have some material, some genetic material. We're calling it RNA, which is like a piece of DNA. So it's not an entire copy of DNA, but it's a piece of DNA. And then we have some little openings that allow for material to come and go within the cell. And that's generally just of what a virus is made out of. So, how does it function? What does it do in your body? How does it make us sick? How does it infect us? Here's the deal. We're going to use our imagination because I've got really sweet graphics here. This circular shape, we're going to call a cell in your body. This right here, we're going to call your DNA. So, your information, your blueprint for life. And here's what a virus does. A virus comes in and he sneaks his way into the cell. He tricks the cell into thinking that it's good material. And the cell says, come on in. It's a party. We want you here. And so he sneaks his way into the cell. And what he does is he hijacks the cell's ability to make copies of DNA. So what he does is he injects his own DNA into the cell, and then the cell will start copying that virus's DNA sort of on accident. And so that virus tricked the cell into making two copies of himself. Those two guys are going to make copies, and it's going to replicate very quickly until it's too dang big and the cell bursts open. Okay, so the cell bursts open. That's now a dead cell. And all of these little tiny baby viruses are going to go out and expand and infect other cells nearby. And that's when we have real trouble happen. And these little viruses come in and they attach to all these different cells. And then those little guys start reproducing more cells and then they burst open. And so we have this amplification, this exponential growth is what they call that. And all of a sudden there's viruses all over your body that you made. Your body made those. Your body copied them because one little guy snuck in, tricked your cells into making copies of himself, and then there you are, infected all over with a virus. And that's essentially what a virus is made out of and kind of how they infect and function inside of your body. So let's see. They cannot reproduce without help from a host cell. That's you. You're the host cell. They can't make copies of themselves unless you help them out. And that's a really important feature to think about. Let's see. Size-wise, viruses are crazy tiny, you guys. So check it. This red blood cell, which if we remember, and maybe I didn't say this, but cells are microscopic. You can't see them with your bare eye. You would never see an individual red blood cell all on your own. You can see blood, but not a cell all on its own. You need a microscope to do that. So if we're going to compare sizes, here's a red blood cell. And even smaller than that, look at that size difference. That's a bacteria. And even smaller than that bacteria are these little guys here. Do you see those? Those are viruses. Viruses are incredibly tiny. So even knowing that they're so tiny, they still vary in size quite greatly. So if you look at the difference, smallpox virus, right, is a coronavirus, not the same as what we're facing today, but it's this crowned shaped virus, right, is 200 nanometers about. You've got the tobacco mosaic virus, which attacks plants, 15 nanometers by 300. Then you've got the bacteriophage, that guy I showed you earlier, right? He's even smaller. Well, we get even tinier from there. Bacteriophage, a different kind right here. This guy is even tinier. He doesn't have the legs. The polio virus, maybe you've heard of that. That made it so your lungs couldn't inflate and deflate. It affected your lungs. Oh, there we go. I zoomed in a little more. So you could really see that we are looking at a lot of variety, a lot of differences, but ultimately so tiny are viruses. They're much tinier than bacteria even. So sorry, this is a really poor picture, but I wanted to kind of quickly review. So we have lots of different kinds of viruses. We have some plant viruses. This is a cucumber virus, which attacks cucumbers. We have the tobacco mosaic virus, which attacks tobacco plants. We have bacteriophage viruses, and these guys, their job is to attack bacteria. They attack and let bacteria make copies of themselves so they can reproduce and make more of themselves. But let's talk about things that you and I come across. Viruses that infect animals, like you and I were animals. So you have hepatitis. You've got coronavirus. Oh, that's actually a lot of different kinds of viruses, but we'll get back to that. You've got herpes virus, which if you've ever had a cold sore, that's who's infecting you. You've got the bird flu, smallpox, and influenza. And you can see even these guys vary greatly from size and shape. So let's talk coronavirus, because that's what we're hearing all about, right? Is the coronavirus. Oops, just joking. We'll get to that. So corona means crown. And so when you're looking at a coronavirus under a microscope, it looks a lot like a crown. So if you look at this picture here, this is a coronavirus under a microscope, and those little spicules, those little keys on the outside, they kind of make it like a nice crown that would sit on your head. So that's why it gets its name. And there are many different kinds of coronavirus. When we're talking about the guy that we're facing and dealing with, we're talking about SARS-CoV-2. Or CoV-2, excuse me. COVID is the name of the sickness that you get from it, but I had a typo there. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the actual virus infecting you. And so influenza, there, I don't know, bird flu. Those are all different kinds of coronaviruses. So we've come across lots of these kind of viruses in the past. This is just kind of a new one we've never seen before. And that's why it's having such a large effect on the populations is we don't have any kind of immunity. We've never seen it before. So let's talk other viruses in history. So the smallpox virus, you guys, wow, it did some remarkable things, remarkably terrible things to history. Smallpox is not quite a coronavirus, but kind of similar in shape. And what it would do is kind of like chickenpox, leave you with pock marks, but they were very extreme and very big, and they would create pustules and they'd burst. And if you survived and lived, you would be scarred for life. These would leave permanent, terrible scars all over your body. Thankfully, we don't see smallpox anymore. We've eradicated it. But it used to be a virus that would infect others. And the way we see it through history is there was a large smallpox virus in the 1500s that infected Native Americans. Europeans came over from Europe, right? Our explorers came over and they had been exposed to a lot of different diseases and viruses because people lived in cities. And oftentimes when we live in cities, we come in close contact with each other and we spread diseases that way by sneezing or whatever it is. So people build up these immunities to diseases. Well, that wasn't the case here in America with the Native Americans. They lived far away from each other. They didn't interact with different populations, so disease didn't spread quite as frequently to the Native people. And so they didn't have quite the immunities that the Europeans did. So when they came over and brought smallpox, it was disastrous. It killed off many, many populations of Native Americans because they had no kind of immunity to any kind of viral infection. It was the first time they'd see it. Very similar to how this is the first time we're seeing the coronavirus. However, we're lucky in the sense that we've been exposed to many other viruses, so we've got some other immunities to different forms of it. So it's not super threatening to us. So let's talk other viruses that maybe you've heard about. Influenza, the flu. So a lot of times I have kids tell me, I had the flu. And not quite accurate. Unless you've had that big old nasty thing shoved up your nose and they swab it around and they take a culture is what they call that. And they send it into the laboratory and they tell you it's influenza positive, then you didn't have the flu. The flu actually knocks you on your butt pretty hard. And that's why it's important to get that flu vaccine. You're sick for at least 2 weeks when you have the real flu. And there's something kind of interesting about the flu is that it mutates often. It mutates every year. So the pieces of DNA that give the directions for how to live change. Every time they're copied, mistakes happen. And when those mistakes happen, it creates mutations in the virus, which results in these brand new little viruses. Now, influenza, we know, does this often. So we track influenza quite closely. And scientists track it, and these virologists, right? They track it and they code out the DNA often, so that way we always every year need to go and get a new flu vaccine because it's kind of a new virus every single year. That's why they say get your flu shot every single year because it mutates and changes, and we just know that to be true about influenza. It's the same basic virus, but just changes a little bit every year that you might not have the immunity you need from last year's shot. You need a new shot this year that matches better with the current strand of virus. So that's influenza. Now, Ebola. This is one of my favorite ones to talk about because this guy is insane. Insane, okay? I'm putting my face up close because it's crazy. All right, I'm going to talk for a minute, and this might be a long video. I want to apologize, but Ebola is crazy interesting, you guys. I'm going to move this. Where's this going? No. Oh, I guess I can only be on the sides. Anyways, Ebola is not shaped like any other virus. And you can see that it's got this kind of squiggly shape to it. And you can see inside of cells, it looks very squiggly compared to the kind of round shapes or like the bacteriophage, which is really geometric in shape. Ebola is a nasty, nasty bugger. Now, no need to worry. We have never had real Ebola infections in the U.S. It seems to really only affect people in Africa is where we see lots of problems. And there's lots of different reasons for that. So let's get into it. What is Ebola? So in 2015, there was this giant, enormous Ebola outbreak. This epidemic on gigantic proportions. Here's what happened in Western Africa, which is right here. We had an Ebola outbreak, and people got sick really fast. And one of the reasons they got sick really fast is Ebola infects you quickly, and it drops you down. It can kill you within 10 days. It's very fast affecting your body. It doesn't kill everybody, but it can kill you. And so it acts quickly. It spreads through blood. So you have to have blood to blood contact to actually catch it. So it's harder to catch than you might think. But once it spreads to a few people in the community, it can spread kind of quickly. And some of the problems that they have in West Africa is they don't have very good medicine. There's not very many doctors or hospitals or places to go. So to get treatment might take a 10-day walk. And by that point, you're gone. So that's one of the problems with Ebola. So you can see, because it's pretty contagious, they take the precautions very seriously of how to have a hazmat outfit on, how to protect yourself. They spray down anybody who's coming in contact. They're very diligent with protecting themselves. So Ebola was first discovered in the Congo, which is like the jungle in Africa. And what they found is that it comes from bats. So similar to how the coronavirus they think may have come from a bat, they actually believe that Ebola quite possibly came from bats as well. And somebody ate an infected bat, or a bat bit them. Actually, I don't think it comes from bat bites. It's somebody ate an infected bat. It's through the blood, because they do eat bats there. And that's how it started. And they were able to pretty quickly shut it down in the very beginning. But in 2015, it went from community to community to community and spread very fast. And so the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, acted quickly to try to get a control over some of it. So let's look at some other stuff. Oh, here's another picture. So when we're looking at the grand scheme of Africa, really it was, let's see, the Sierra Leone, and I can't think of the other two countries that are right here. But these countries right here were the ones that were really affected. It did spread into other areas, but where there was better health care, there was a better response time to the sickness. All right. So what does it do to you? Well, the first 7 to 9 days, you start off with a headache, fatigue, which means you're tired, fever, you're hot, and sore muscles, right? Kind of like any old flu or cold symptoms. By day 10, all of a sudden your fever will spike. And when I say spike, I'm talking 104 to 106 degrees. That's like brain damage is happening. You're too hot. So crazy high fever, vomiting, and not just vomiting, but vomiting blood because you're starting to bleed. And then this passive behavior, which means if you were to lay here and your friend were to slap you, it wouldn't do anything. You'd be too out of it to be able to even respond. Okay. By day 11, we have bruising, brain damage because of that high fever. You can't have a high fever that long without having brain damage. And then we have lots of internal bleeding, which is coming out of any opening in your body, which is really gross. I know, but that's how it spreads, is that a person gets so sick that they bleed internally, and then that blood oozes out of their body, and that's where it spreads. It spreads from blood, not spit. Their spit's not going to harm you at all. That's very different. Coronavirus is through droplets, through spit, whereas this is through blood. And then by day 12, we have loss of consciousness, seizures, and then probably death. Now, that's not to say that you wouldn't survive, because it's typically about a 50% survival rate, actually, which is good, right? However, compared to any other virus, that's massive. I think we're looking at like a 2% death rate in the coronavirus, and this is 50%. So that means 50% of the people who get sick are going to die from it. It is one of the deadliest viruses on Earth. We're talking in 2015 when it had this massive outbreak happened. Over 28,000 people got sick, with 11,000 of those dying. So, and those are all reported cases and reported deaths. We know in these kind of rural areas, we don't always have all the information, but pretty violent stuff. So that is what Ebola is. And I know that's kind of scary. Don't be scared. It's actually not so bad. We've never really had any cases in the US. Any cases we've ever had in the US have been doctors who have worked in West Africa and known that they were going to have exposure possibly to Ebola and then come home for treatments. And because we've got great healthcare here, it's never really spread out from there. We've done a really great job. So it's never been an issue here. It's found in the bats in Africa, naturally occurring virus there. And it just really seems to be an issue because of that rural lifestyle of not being able to get to the doctor and then not having knowledge of how to protect yourself from it. And that it happens just so quickly, right? And so, if you're worried about coronavirus, right, and kind of what we're facing with this, really in the grand scheme, it's not something we need to be scared about. Yes, you should be smart. You should protect yourself. You should prevent infection. And so we've got all these steps that we can do that, right? The face mask, the distancing, sanitizing our tables, and taking that very seriously because we want to stay in school, right? And protecting those around us because it's really affecting the elderly because it affects your lungs. These little viral things, the cells they attach to are lung cells. So they go and attach to lung cells and then they break apart the lung cells and destroy that tissue, which makes it hard to breathe. And for the elderly or anyone who maybe has a pre-existing condition, that's very dangerous. And so we want to protect our people as best we can. And that's the reasons why it's great to live here in the United States is that we've got great healthcare and we can protect our people from the viruses that we're looking at. So, in the future, we're going to talk a little bit more about vaccines and how vaccines prevent us from getting sick from viruses. But now I want you thinking, knowing what you know now, is a virus a living thing or is it not? I want you to figure that out.